Hello everybody, it's Sarah, and before we get into today's video, there's two things I want to have out of the way first. The first is, if you can hear a lot of background noise on and off in this video, for once it's not gonna be construction works, but every now and again it's getting really stormy for the past few hours, so there's a lot of wind and a lot of rain, and if you can hear that, I am sorry. And the second thing I wanted to have out of the way first is I wanted to apologize for not uploading in the past week. The reason for that is that a new semester started and I kind of don't have it down yet when I have time to film and so on and edit and everything. But also because I'm going to have a lot to do this semester, I decided to cut down to 2 uploads a week, which will be on Wednesday and Sunday at 7 p.m. Central European time. So yeah, now that we have that out of the way, we can get into today's video, which is my mid-month check-in. So I will tell you all about the books I have finished so far in March, and also all the books that I am still currently reading. And we will start with 2 DNFs that I both DNF'd very early on. The first of those is The Physician by Noah Gordon. This was one of the books I pulled from my physical TBR jar. I read about a chapter of this and pretty much instantly decided to DNF it because one of the first descriptions of a person we get in this book is of a prostitute with like her boobs spilling out of her corset or whatever and her nipples being out and everything. And I was just like, that's gonna be this type of historical fiction, right? And it's also written by a man, so I'm just like, I'm not into reading a book where we'll repeatedly have very uncomfortable descriptions of women, so I decided to just DNF it and not bother trying to read 900 pages to see if I like it after all. Similarly, also I tried buddy reading Cloud Atlas with Monica from Mooney Reads. Cloud Atlas by David Mitchell, by the way, and we both decided to DNF it. The reason for that is the very first chapter is a chapter that's kind of historical fiction type thing. It's a log book of a person who is like on an expedition, sea voyage type thing. And yeah, I just really didn't like the way native people and indigenous people were described. Also the repeated use of the word Indian for every person who even remotely looked indigenous. The N-word was used in a context where it just wasn't necessary, just for, you know, historical realism. And that's even arguing that in historical fiction, even by white authors, it's sometimes necessary to use the N-word or okay to use the N-word. But in the context that it was used here, I just thought that even if you were someone who would argue that sometimes you can use it because it's realistic, because it's historical accuracy or whatever, I just thought that in this case it absolutely was not necessary. I don't know, hard to explain, but I just didn't like it. And so I also decided to not finish this because honestly I have so many books that I'm excited to read that I just don't need to finish a book just to see if I end up liking it. Continuing on with a few rereads, I had 3 of those so far this month. The first of those is the 4th book in the Heroes of Olympus series, which is The House of Hades. I remembered that this was my favorite in the series when I first read it, and I'm happy to say that it still seems to be. I mean, I haven't reread the 5th one, of course, but out of the other 4, this still is my favorite. Then my next reread was The Well of Ascension, and I know this is the final empire, but I accidentally picked this one off of my bookshelf and I'm too lazy to get The Well of Ascension. The Well of Ascension is the 2nd book in the Mistborn trilogy by Brandon Sanderson. I am currently this year rereading the entirety of the Cosmere because I'm participating in the Crab-along, and March actually is Final Empire time and Well of Ascension is only the book for April, but I just, you know, forged ahead a little bit, I guess. But yeah, I still really enjoyed my reread of The Well of Ascension. I would still say I didn't enjoy it as much as The Final Empire, just as on my first read through of the trilogy. I think Well of Ascension actually is my least favorite in the trilogy. But yeah, it's still a Brandon Sanderson book, so I still love it. And then lastly, I have a spontaneous reread, and that is The Magician's Guild by Trudy Canavan, which is the first book in the Black Magicians Trilogy. I am currently buddy reading this actually with someone from the Crab Along Discord, and we're having so much fun rereading this. We're basically constantly just either screaming about Akron, or screaming about how we want Rothan to hug us, or screaming about how Daniel is the most useless gay person ever, and it's just glorious and so much fun. And I finished the first book, currently reading the second book, but you'll get to see that later. So now I have 5 books left that I finished so far in March. Let's start with Six of Crows by Leigh Bardugo, because I do not have a physical copy of this. I read this in audio, and if I don't talk about it now, I'll forget it. This, for those of you who don't know, is an ensemble cast heist story set in the same world as the Grisha Trilogy, although it's set a few years after the Grisha Trilogy, I think. And yeah, I gotta say, just as with the Grisha Trilogy, I just don't get the hype. I'm gonna say part of that might be because I read it in audio. The reason for that was that my library, even though they do have Crooked Kingdom actually, did not have Six of Crows in. And I just, you know, I wasn't confident enough that I'm gonna like this duology that I wanted to buy the books and spend money on them and spend shelf space on them, and I'm quite happy that I didn't actually. But as I said, a reason for me not liking it might be because I read the audiobook. With audiobooks, I just usually have a problem immersing myself in the world, getting to know the characters and so on. And yeah, but even so, I'm just like, I just don't think it's as, you know, complex and amazing as everyone constantly says it is. But then again, I'm not a YA reader, so that might also be a reason for that. Then let's get all of the disappointing YA I read so far this month out of the way. Next, I finished Chain of Iron by Cassandra Clare. This is the second book in the Last Hour series, which is the 4th or 5th, depending on how you count them, series within the Shadowhunter Chronicles. And in this series, we follow the children from the characters from the Infernal Devices series. And I gotta be honest, the main reason I still had a good time generally reading this book is because I more or less love James. I don't know what it is about a lot of the male characters in Cassandra Clare's books, but they just get all my motherly feelings going and I just adopt them, you know? Except for Chase, because I don't like Chase. Not anymore, at least. And then the second reason why I enjoyed this is for just the brief glimpses that we get of Tessa, Will, and Jem, because, you know, I love them a lot. They are my babies. They're just, I care about them so much. But aside from that, I gotta say, I'm just not the biggest fan of Cordelia anymore. Again, I just think it might be because I have grown out of Cassandra Clare's particular brand of I got to save the world heroines. Then Anna is kind of cool, but honestly, I've read so many other better sapphic characters that right now I'm just like, I used to love her, but now I'm just, eh. Also, the miscommunication trope in this book is just, I really didn't like it. I really didn't like it. There was a lot of the, I'm gonna tell you about this later, but then like you'll never let them tell you later thing. Not a fan. And then lastly, although this is just an issue in YA in general, I feel like, I don't know what's the problem with YA authors and writing proper platonic male-female friendships, but without either of them being queer or like being attracted to the opposite sex as well, and without either of them having a secret crush on the other. Like, what's the problem? Just write solid male-female friendships. You know, characters can care about each other without having to be in love with each other. You do know that. You do know that, right? Yeah, anyway, I still enjoyed my experience because nostalgia, but overall I just think, you know, it's just getting forced. There's nothing left to tell in this world. Just Cassandra Clare, please leave it be. The threats are just not interesting anymore because it's the same thing over and over again. And also Cassandra Clare starts to, you know, break her own canon because there's some things she said in earlier books that suddenly don't count anymore. And yeah, sadly, but I'll still read every single Cassandra Clare book that's coming out until ever, probably. So, you know, I just signed up for that. Then I finished the Broken Earth trilogy by N.K. Jemisin with the last book, The Stone Sky, and I have to say I enjoyed each book in the series less. I preferred the first book, I enjoyed the second book, and the third book I was just like, not the biggest fan anymore. But I will probably have a full review of this trilogy up, so won't say too much now because this video is getting long enough already as is. Then I also started the Daybed trilogy by S.A. Chakraborty with The City of Brass. I thought this was a slow start, but then I pretty much read it in one sitting and in one go through. And yeah, I gotta say I did enjoy it more or less. This, by the way, is a Middle Eastern inspired fantasy, and it follows this girl who lives in Cairo but then is taken away by a deva or a jinn to this city of brass where all the jinn live. And there's a lot of different factions in conflict with each other and so on. And yeah, I enjoyed it, although I have to say the chemistry between the two main characters was very bad. Kind of all the characters are either extremists or fundamentalists, and I wasn't sure how I felt about that because for most of the book, actually for all of the book, I was like, I can see most of your viewpoints, but I actually don't like any of you, which, you know, it's also fun, kind of. And yeah, I just thought the only kind of chemistry that worked within the novel was between the main character, and I don't know if he's supposed to be the second love interest or not, if there's supposed to be a love triangle or not, but yeah, that other character. If you've read the book, you will know who I mean. But yeah, the central romance I thought was kind of very weak. We'll see how it goes on in later books. And then the last book I finished was Identity by Mithu Sanyal, who is a German author but with Indian roots. And this book, first of all, as you can see, I tabbed it a lot because there were a lot of thoughts I had on this book because it's amazing. This book follows not Saraswati. Saraswati is a professor of cultural studies in Düsseldorf, I think it was. And she is thought to be Indian. However, big scandal, she actually is white, who went through hormone therapy to darken her skin tone. And that starts a lot of questions about oppression, about identity, about race, like everything to do with identity politics. And within this book we actually follow one of Saraswati's students who is half German and half Indian, and we actually follow her both as she's growing up as well as she goes to confront Saraswati about what she has done. And yeah, I just thought there were a lot of very interesting things talked about within this book. I also loved kind of talking about racism, identity and so on, not from a US, American or even UK perspective, because I mean, there's a lot of parallels between Central European identity politics as well as, or racism, as well as American racism. But there's this one very beautiful sentence within this book which just says, translated, everything you know about racism is imported. It's imported from North America. And that is very true. And actually there was this whole page that talked about how within the American melting pot, everyone who is white kind of melted together to this white super race, but within Central Europe, not everyone is the same kind of white, and not everyone even is equally white, which talks a lot about racism towards Eastern Europeans that's very prevalent within both Austria as well as Germany. And I just loved those different perspectives on these topics that are talked about a lot currently, but so rarely get talked about in a way, as I said, that isn't from a US American or a UK perspective. And so yeah, I very much appreciated it and I very much loved this. I don't agree with everything that was said in this book, but overall I just had a lot of thoughts and a lot of, you know, stuff for discussion. and I wish this was translated, but it only came out in February, so you know, you can only get it in German, but if you can read German, definitely go and read this. So lastly, let me quickly go through the books I'm still currently reading. As I said, I am rereading the second book in the Magicians Guild Black Magicians Trilogy by Trudy Canavan, which is The Novice. I'm about a third of the way into it, although I'll probably finish this by the time you get to see this video. Then I have about 150 pages left of The Name of All Things, which is the second book in the A Chorus of Dragons series by Jen Lyons. I'm buddy reading this with Cleo from Bemused Bookworm. I am about a fourth of the way into The Gathering Storm by Robert Jordan and Brandon Sanderson, which is the 12th book in the Wheel of Time series. I am now finally ready to finish this series since this has now arrived. And I also started The 100,000 Kingdoms, which is the first book in the Inheritance trilogy. I got the big bind up of the entire trilogy. This is the buddy read for this month for my book club, which is of Queens, Witches and Valkyries, where we read one adult high fantasy book written by a woman per month, and I will leave all the links to that book club down below. The poll for April read is currently up on the Twitter. And yeah, I am about 70 pages into it and I am already enjoying it so much. I think this trilogy might become my favorite because I definitely enjoy the writing style the most in this one. Because I gotta say, a lot of times N.K. Jemisin has a very distant writing style, which in this one definitely isn't the case. And yeah, that was it for the books that I read and I'm currently reading so far in March. If you enjoyed this video, maybe think about giving me a thumbs up and also maybe subscribing. All the links to my social media are in the description box down below. Also, as I said, all the links to my book club are in the description box down below. Tell me in the comments if you have read any of the books I talked about just now and what your thoughts are on them. And I hope I'll see you soon. Bye!